So let's head over to our edit module here, and we're just going to start with this waterfall photo right here. And I'm just going to hit D on my keyboard, and that's going to take me into the edit module. And I'll actually just maximize this for you guys here. Okay, sweet. So now we're inside of the edit module. And for this particular webinar, we're not going to be modifying anything inside of the develop tab. Well, we're going to be modifying just one thing. We're not going to be modifying any of the tonality or any colors or anything like that. The only thing we're going to be doing inside of the develop tab for a few of these photos is we're just going to change our camera profile. So other than that, all of the rest of the edits we do on all of these photos are primarily going to be done inside of the effects tab with different filters. So inside of the develop tab here, just to start out with this photo, all I'm going to do is go into my camera profile, and I'm going to go down to ON1 neutral. And the reason I'm doing that is just so I can have sort of a flatter, a less contrasty image, so I have a lot more room to work with my image. So next, I'm just going to crop the photo. So I'm just going to hit C on my keyboard. That's going to pull up my crop tool, and I'm just going to use a quick 16:9, and we'll just pull it in here, and I'm going to remove this little kind of branch, and then I'll just pull this in to kind of position it to remove some of that excess on these trees and whatnot. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and enter. And there we go. Now we have a nicely cropped image, and we've changed our camera profile so that we have a sort of well-rounded flat photo that we can get to work with. So now let's head into effects, and we can start modifying the different filters. So to start off with this image, I think first we need to tone down this foreground area. I think it's really bright, and what we need to do is really just focus on this subject area, which is our waterfall. So let's add a filter here, and let's add a curves filter. So inside my curves filter, if you're not familiar with the tone curve right here at the left bottom of your tone curve is your blacks. In the middle of your tone curve, in the middle of this line going up, is your midtones. And then at the top, we have our highlights. Well, for this bottom foreground area, I basically just want to remove midtones and highlights and some shadow tones to just kind of tone this down and remove it from being a distraction to the viewer. So inside my curves pane here, I'm just going to grab on my shadow tones, and I'm just going to pull them down. And then I'm going to go up to my highlights, and I'm going to pull those down too. And keep in mind that I'm not doing this to this top part of the photo. I'm strictly going to apply this to the bottom part of this image. So don't worry if this top part looks a little dark. We're going to remove that filter from the top part of our image anyway. So now that we have that done inside of our curves filter here, let's go ahead and let's hit M on our keyboard, and that's going to grab our masking bug. So now that I have my masking bug selected, I'm just going to drop this down on this line where my water is meeting the river here. And I'm just going to pull this down. Feather it a little bit. Perfect. So now if I turn this curves filter off and on, it does a great job of just toning this foreground area down on the scene. Well, I'm going to do something a little bit different with this tone curve, and I'm actually going to go into these RGB channels real quick. So inside of these RGB channels, you can actually modify the different colors for this photo with the tone curve. So before I begin that, I just want to make sure you guys know that I'm actually going to turn this photo into a black and white. So you may see me pulling up a little bit too much or too little on the blues and greens, and just know that it's so that we can modify our black and white tones really well. So don't think I'm crazy. It's all going to work out in the end. So for this particular tone curve, what I want to do in this bottom area is I just want to go into my greens, and I'm actually going to remove greens from that bottom area. And then I'm going to go into my blues, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue. And that's just for this bottom area right here. So now let's add one last filter. Or not one last filter, let's add another filter. Let's add another curves filter. And for this particular curves filter, we're actually going to modify the top part of our photo rather than modifying the bottom part of our photo. So let's go back to those curves that we added earlier, and we can actually rename this bottom one bottom, and we'll double click to rename this one top. So let's go into that bottom curves filter. Let's copy this mask. Let's go back to our top curves filter, and we'll just paste this mask, and then we'll invert it so that if we view the filter, the top part of our image is getting this curves filter and not the bottom. So now what we need to do is we need to pull up some of these shadow tones and bring a little bit of life to this top part of our image. So inside of this curves filter here, I'm just going to grab kind of the shadow tones area right here, and I'm just going to pull up on it and kind of just move the handle up and just kind of play with the midtones a little bit, just so I can pull out some exposure and reveal a little bit of shadow detail in this top part of my photo. And I know it looks incredibly flat, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to this left part, and I'm going to pull in on this to add in a little bit of contrast. So now that I've pulled up on those midtones, it was a little bit flat. So then I head down to my tone curve here, and in my black point, I can pull it over, and you'll see it adds in a little bit more contrast. Just like that. So now if I turn this tone curve off and on, we've really brought out a lot of that shadow detail from the top part of this photo. Okay, so now this is where it's going to get a little bit wonky, and you guys are going to think I'm crazy. But so let's go into our tone curve here, and let's actually go into the green, and I'm just going to take this green and I'm going to pull it up a ton. Probably about right there. And I know that looks really bad and it doesn't look realistic at all, but there's a method to my madness. So let's go and we'll add another filter here. And at the beginning I was saying that we were going to convert this photo to a black and white image. So let's go in and let's add a black and white filter. And now let me show you the reason why I pulled up on that green color quite a bit. So inside this black and white filter, if you're not familiar with the black and white filter, you can choose your conversion method, and if you choose color response here, you can actually modify the tonalities of each of these colors by using these different sliders. So because I have so much green on these rocks in here in my midtones, if I go over to this black and white filter and I go into my green slider here, watch as I move this green slider around. See how much play I have with the tonalities of just the green color? So this allows me to target just specific green colors with my black and white because I have so much green being applied with that curves filter. So now I can go in, and when I'm modifying this black and white, I can use these different sliders and really harness all of the different tones I was looking for and modify these colors specifically. So if I want to modify aqua a little bit, I could bring that down. I know my yellows are probably pretty hot. And then maybe some blues. And then we can use that blue to tone the foreground even more. So now that I've modified the tonality of this black and white filter, I can go in here and I can actually modify to bring out a little bit more brightness. I can add in some highlights. All I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull back on the brightness a little bit, and I'm going to pull up on the whites a hair, or pull down on the whites a hair. And I'm doing that so I can remove some true white from this waterfall area, because if I bring these back to normal, you can see there's a little bit of true white. So we'll remove that. Perfect. And then let's go in, let's add in a little bit of detail. Probably right about there. Okay, so the last thing I want to do to this black and white filter is you can actually go inside of here and you can add a toner, which is basically like a split tone. And one of my favorite toners to add is if you go into this preset menu, this Selenium 1 is a really awesome split toner. Well, whenever you're adding different toners to your image, one thing I like to actually turn on is this preserve black and whites. So if you click this, this is going to preserve your true white and your true black. So you'll see that when I turn this off and on, it's keeping the true white and true black in my image and not applying that toner to it. So it really maintains that true black and white look on your photo. So now let's hit the # key on our keyboard. There you have it. That's a quick way to really modify all of the different color tones in your black and white, strictly by using a couple different curves filters. So let's go back into browse here and we'll grab a different photo. Okay, so for this particular photo, I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to crop it. I think there's a ton of this area, these rocks especially, they're just huge and kind of in the way and really distracting. So let's hit C on our keyboard. That'll grab our crop tool. And let's actually, yeah, we can use a 16:9 again. And I'm just gonna pull this in. Maybe a little bit more. I think that looks pretty good right there. There we go. So now we have the 3 leaves, we have our water, but if we look right here, we have a water spot on my lens. So what we're gonna do to fix this real quick, and I know I said that we weren't gonna use the develop tab to do anything, but inside the develop tab, I guess you could do this inside of your effects tab too, but we're gonna actually use our clone stamp tool to bring this spot back. So inside of our retouch tools here, we have our clone stamp tool, which you can also grab by holding down Shift and hitting S on your keyboard. And the clone stamp tool works by using a target area on your photo, and then you can actually clone that or stamp that onto another area. So to start with the clone stamp tool, make sure you have it selected, and then hold down Option or Alt on Windows. Click in an area that you want to clone and then brush onto another area, like for example this area right here. And now I can just hover over this, and if I brush, I can just kind of brush that on, and there we go. Now I don't have that water spot anymore. Alright, so now what we need to do is let's actually go over to our develop tab here, and for this particular photo, let's see if we need to choose a different camera profile. So let's go in here, and I think we're good. We'll just leave it at ON1 standard. I think that looks pretty good just like that. So to start out here, let's go into effects and we'll add everybody's favorite filter. We'll add a filter and we'll add dynamic contrast. Sweet, so now we have a lot of detail being applied to this photo here. Well, one of my favorite preset styles, I actually created it during a webinar, but it's this Fave DC. And so inside this Fave DC, I have small pulled up to 10, the medium and the large are the same as at natural. And then I have a little bit of a white and a shadow boost, and then I've toned down the blacks to add in some contrast, and then I've really pulled up on my vibrance. So I'm actually going to go down, I'm going to pull back on the vibrance to about right there. That looks pretty good like that. So now if I turn this dynamic contrast filter off and on, perfect. Looks pretty good just like that. And if you don't know how to make a preset style inside of a filter, just go in here, modify any of these sliders or settings, and then every filter has a More Styles menu. Just click on it, and then go down to Save New Style. And then you can save the style, just give it a name, and then you can always go back and you can access that style whenever you apply that filter. Okay, so if we turn this dynamic contrast filter off and on, it's obviously being applied to the entire image. Well, if you look in here at this water, it's applying a lot of detail right there, and that's actually kind of crunching up that area in the back of the photo, and I don't really like how that looks. Well, I only really want this dynamic contrast filter applied to this left area on my screen here. So real quickly, there's a few different ways I could mask that out. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a color range mask so that I can avoid applying it to this blue whitish area on the image. So let's go into our dynamic contrast filter here, and inside the masking options, to create a color range mask, we're just going to go down to color range here, and we just click on it, and now it's already created a color range mask for us. So if we look at our color range here, you can see this color is targeting these specific colors in the photo. So if I view this mask, you can see that this color is present in these areas on my image, and that the mask is making that mask automatically for us based off of those colors. So what we need to do is we need to use a different color so that we can target different areas on the photo. So I'm just going to click on my color dropper here, and I'm just going to drop it on this area of blue. So now if I go over and I view my mask, now I see it's only applying that dynamic contrast filter, or mainly applying that dynamic contrast filter to this area over here. So we'll just pull up on this, or pull down on this, until we have a little bit of separation here with this black. And now that we have a little bit of separation, I'll just grab my masking brush, and I can just brush that out using my mask view. Oops, so I gotta invert the mask. So now that I have this area kind of targeted with the water, I can just invert this mask. So now if I view this, and I turn this off and on, the detail is only being applied to the rocky areas on this image, and it's not being applied anywhere on the water. Okay, so now let's go in and let's stylize this photo a little bit more. And let's add a filter, and I'm actually gonna add a split tone filter. So with the split tone filter, I'm gonna use one of my favorite presets in this warm preset here. So I really like how that looks on this photo. If I turn this off and on, it gives it a nice kind of faded matte look, and it gives it a little bit of more warmth in my highlights, and then it adds a little bit more blue into the shadows. Well, I wanna change the mode to actually darken it up a little bit more. So inside of your split tone filter, you can actually change the blending mode really easily. And there's a few different ones, and you can access them here in this mode menu. So I'm just gonna go into my mode, and I'm gonna go down to multiply. Now that I've chosen multiply, that's going to darken up this split tone filter so that it darkens the image a little bit more, rather than just applying the split toning to the colors. So now let's go in, and let's actually pull up on the color for these leaves. So I'm just gonna add a filter again, and let's add a color enhancer. So with this color enhancer, I know there's a lot of green in this photo. So let's actually just go over to our color enhancer, and we'll just click foliage. Perfect. Inside this color enhancer though, I'm gonna go into my orange, and I'm gonna pull up on that. And I'm actually gonna pull up on the brightness as well. And you can see, if I zoom in here on this leaf in particular, that if I play with the brightness, it really modifies just that specific brightness of that orange. So let's leave it about 16. I think that looks pretty good just like that. Okay, so now that we have the colors popping, I want to do one more thing to make them pop even more. So this is going to be a little bit crazy also, but this is a cool way to make colors pop in your photo. So I'm just going to go, I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add a black and white filter. I'm just going to go in here, I'm going to choose red. And in this black and white filter, I'm going to go into my blending modes by clicking on this gear icon right here. So inside of this gear icon, I can choose different blending modes for how I want this applied. So inside of the blending modes, I can actually choose the tonalities that I want this to be applied to. So I'm going to go into this apply to, and I'm going to go down to shadows. So now that if I turn this off and on, it's strictly applying this black and white filter to the shadows in my photo, and it's not applying it anywhere else. So in here, you can see that it's kind of pulling the colors from the shadow tones in that leaf. So I'm just going to be on my keyboard, and I'm just going to brush this out from this leaf. Okay, so now if I zoom out here, it's really making those colors pop in there really nicely. And then we're really kind of toning down this area in the background. And we can also go in here and you can modify this filter to either apply it to more or less of these colors. Let's choose color response. Perfect. Okay, so one last thing I want to do real quick with this photo is I'm actually just going to go over and I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to add another curves filter. And I'm just going to go into my tone curve here. And I'm just going to pull down on the midtones a little bit. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to pull over just a hair on these highlights real quick. Just like that. So if I turn this off and on, does a good job of just kind of toning down this area, adding in some contrast, and then giving it a little bit of a highlight boost. Well, I don't want this applied to this right side of my photo because it's already pretty dark as it is. So we'll just hit M on our keyboard again. We'll drop this down, and we'll tilt it like that. So if I turn this off and on now, does a good job of really just toning down that area, kind of focusing the viewer's eye on that leaf right there. So if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, we've really brought the viewer's attention right into this leaf area right there. I went to the coast this weekend, and that's why I have so many water photos. I went to Sweet Creek Falls, kind of near Eugene, and then went to Florence, and then went to Thor's Well. So just a lot of beach photos for this webinar. Okay, so now we have this lighthouse pick, and good thing to do for this is probably just crop out this white house right here and remove a little bit of excess to this left side. So let's hit C on our keyboard, let's grab our crop tool, and let's just use a, can we use a 4x5? Let's just use a 4x5. That's fine. And then I'll just kind of straighten this with the fence over there. Okay, perfect. Sweet. So now we have this lighthouse photo right here. And the first thing I want to do to it is I'm actually going to go into my Develop tab, and I'm going to choose ON1 Landscape. Boom. So now I just have, kind of a high contrasty image, a little bit of light on this lighthouse. And I really like how it's working out so far. Okay, so now let's get a little bit stylistic with our filters for this particular photo. And let's add sort of a vintagey look to this shot. So let's go into Effects, and we'll add a filter. And I'm going to add an antique filter here. And one of my favorite antique filters, if you go into color, is I choose London. And the cool thing about these antique filters, or any of these filters for example, is you can actually modify the blending mode for each of them. So for this particular filter, let's say I really like what this does to the tonality of my photo, but I don't like that it blurs the line between black and white and color, where there's not a lot of saturation. So inside my antique blending modes here, I can access them by this gear icon. And I'm going to go to my mode, and I'm going to go down, and I'm just going to choose luminosity. And by choosing luminosity, that is telling this antique filter to only apply your filter's look to the tonality of my image. So by clicking that, it's not going to apply any of that desaturation to the photo. So by turning this off and on, I just have that nice kind of antique boost, and it's added in some nice film grain. And it kind of looks like a vintagey photo. So now let's go in and we'll add a filter here. And to make it even more vintagey, I'm going to add a texture, and we'll go into our photographic textures, and let's choose this light leak here. Light leak 4. Perfect. So inside this light leak, I obviously don't want it that strong in the photo. So I'm going to go to my mode here, and inside your textures, whenever you choose a texture, you can actually modify the mode right below that texture, right with this menu right here. And if I choose lighter, there we go. Now it's not so dark on my photo. I'm actually going to go over and I'm going to turn this opacity all the way, but then I'm going to lower the opacity for the entire filter because I don't want it that strong over on this left side. It can be kind of a gentle light leak. That looks pretty good just like that. Okay, so the second thing that I want to do to this photo, or the third thing I guess would be, is I want to bring in a little bit more interest to the sky area. So let's go in, we'll add a texture, or we'll add a filter, and we'll add a textures filter. Whoops. Textures filter. Let's go into our category, and let's actually replace the sky a little bit. So I'm going to go to my skies, and I'm going to choose this skies. Ooh, going too fast. 24. Boom. So now we have this nice sky texture on our image, but it's covering the entire photo. What we can do up here is if we only wanted to apply to the sky, what I usually do to make sure that it's not being applied anywhere you don't want it is I'll go over to that textures filter, I'll invert that mask so that it's not being applied at all. Now I'm going to grab my masking brush by hitting B on my keyboard. So now that I have my masking brush selected, I'm going to make it kind of big, and then I'm going to go up and I'm going to make sure my perfect brush is on, and then I'm going to set it to paint in. So I have my textures masking options at black, so it's concealing the entire filter from my photo, and I have my masking brush set to paint in. So we're going to paint in this sky replacement texture just by using our perfect brush. So I'm just going to kind of brush it in here. Just avoiding the other areas. Just like that. Okay. So now I need to go in, and I'm just going to remove that blue from this lighthouse area. Cool. So now if I turn this texture off and on, does a good job of bringing in some nice clouds to the sky. So let's actually go over here, and I'm going to go into this skies texture, and I'm going to increase the opacity. And you can see that kind of blends more with the image because it's not so dark. And I'm actually going to up the opacity for the actual sky layer. So now if I turn the sky layer off and on, oops, you can see we have a little bit of, a little bit of blue. Okay. But there we go. Does a pretty good job of adding in some nice interest to that sky. So let's go over here. I'm going to add a filter. Let's add a LUTs filter just to top this photo off. And I'm just going to use this preset brand. Just like that. So now if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, we've really stylized this photo, added in some different sky, brought in some stylistic looks to the lighthouse, and then brought in a light leak to give it that vintage look. All right, so for this particular photo, I think we definitely need to crop first. So let's hit C on our keyboard. That's going to pull up our crop tool. And I'm just going to reset this so that I have the original photo ratio. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to level it. So I'm going to grab my leveling tool here, and I'll just go over, I'll click. I'm just going to drag this on this horizon line, make sure it's kind of resting on the horizon line. Then I'll just drop it, and now I have a level photo. All right, so let's remove kind of the majority of this top part here. I'm just going to hold down Shift. It's going to pull in, and then I'll just move this up, and then maybe a little bit more. Sweet, I think that looks pretty good like that. Let's just hit enter. Cool, I think that looks pretty good so far. All right, so for this particular photo, inside of develop, I'm gonna do the same thing with I've been doing with these other photos. I'm gonna go into my camera profile and I'm gonna choose ON1 landscape. And you can see right away that really helps add in contrast, kind of boost the whites a little bit, really adds in a nice stylistic look to the photo in just one click. And if you're looking at your screen and you don't see a camera profile option inside tone and color, that's because you're not shooting in RAW. So if you shoot in RAW, you should have a camera profile area that'll pop up and you can choose a different camera profile. Okay, so let's go into effects here. And let's add a filter, and first let's let's deal with this top sky area because it's a little bit too bright and I really want all of the attention on Thor's well right here. So I'm gonna add a curves filter and I'm just gonna pull down on the midtones just like that because I really want to bring out all of the kind of cloud detail and color in this sky area. But I obviously don't want it applied to this bottom area in my photo. So we'll hit M on our keyboards, and I'm going to go up and I'll just drop this down, and then I'll just flip it. And there we go. If I turn this off and on, really helps kind of take that out as a distraction in the shot. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to apply kind of the same principle, but we want to do it to the foreground area. So I'm going to add another filter, add another curves filter, and we'll just pull up on the midtones in here. Maybe about right there. That looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to add in contrast by going over to my black point here. And if I pull on it to the right, you can see it adds in a little bit of contrast. That's probably good right about there. So if I turn this off and on, really good job of pulling out all of that shadow detail. But again, we don't want it applied to the top part of our photo. So we'll just drop this down kind of right above our rocks. And there we go. Now it's strictly applied to this bottom area of our image where we have all of that water flowing. Okay, so now let's go in and let's really bring out a lot of this kind of glowy look to the water. So let's add a filter, and I'm going to add a sunshine filter. And let's go in here. Yeah, let's use glow, and let's see how glowy we can get this water. Okay. So obviously if I turn this sunshine filter off and on, it's applied to the entire photo. And well, that looks pretty good. I think we should remove some of that glow from these rocks. So let's go into our sunshine filter here and let's create a luminosity mask so that the filter here is only applied to the bright areas or the water in this photo. So to create a luminosity mask, I'm just going to go into my sunshine filter here and I'm just going to select lumen. So now if I go in and I view this photo here, you can see that the bright areas where the water is at is where the majority of the mask is being applied. Well, we need to fine tune this even more so that the whites in the water have even more white. So let's go over, and to modify a luminosity mask, we're going to use this level slider and this window slider here. So with this level slider, if you're trying to modify the mask to strictly target your midtones or your highlights, you're going to want to remove shadow tones from your mask. So to do that, you're going to pull right on your shadow tones. So this left area is going to be my shadow tones, and watch as I pull right on it. It removes some of those shadow tones from my mask. Well, if I want to add in midtones or I want to bring in more of that white, I can go over to the middle of this level slider, which is my midtones. And if I pull that left, see how it incorporates more midtones by pulling it left? And so this is where you kind of find that balance of pulling the shadows to the right and to the left and the midtones to the right and to the left. This is where you kind of find that balance. And then if my highlights, say I want to bring in a little bit more highlights, I can incorporate more highlights by pulling the highlights to the left. So let's pull those in a little bit, maybe not so many shadow tones. I'd say that's pretty good right there. That looks pretty good right about there. Okay, but if I go back and I view this, and I turn this off and on, the sunshine filter is going to be a little bit harsh around the edges, and it's also being applied to the top part of our photo. So let's go in here, let's view this mask, and I'm actually going to remove a little bit more of the shadow tones by just going down to my window slider here. So with this window slider, it allows me to adjust the window, they call it, of your mask, but technically it's a really quick way to just remove highlights or shadows from your mask. So with this window slider here, this left point is my shadows. Watch as I pull it to the right. It removes shadow tones like instantly. So I'm just going to pull this to the right just a hair. Just to remove a little bit more of these shadow tones. Like that. Okay, so now let's go up, and because I don't want such harsh edges around the mask, I'm just going to go up to my feathering. I'm just going to pull over on it to kind of soften that mask up a little bit. Just like that. So now if I view my photo and I turn the sunshine filter off and on, see how that does an awesome job of really pulling out kind of the whites and the sunshine look from the water? Well, let's go ahead and hit M on our keyboard, and I'm just going to drop this down again, kind of same area. So now if I turn this off and on, it's a little bit easier to see just what it does to the water. So now that we've created that mask right there, we can do a lot of things with just this mask by copying and pasting, using different filters. So let's go ahead and let's copy this mask. We'll add a filter, and let's add dynamic contrast. So you'll see that if I turn this dynamic contrast filter off and on, it does wonders for these rocks in here, and it really makes it look nice and detailed. But we don't want it applied to the water. So let's go into our dynamic contrast filter, and we can paste that mask from earlier, and then we'll just invert it. So now if I turn this off and on, the detail is strictly being applied to the darker areas on the photo. So if we go and we view our mask here, we can actually go and we can add in more shadow tones, remove more midtones, there we go. So now if I turn this off and on, there we go. You can see it really applies a nice bit of detail to the rocks in here. So let's go in here, and I'm just going to pull up on this small a little bit. And then I'm going to pull up on the whites, the vibrance, and these shadows. So now let's turn this off and on here. Oop. Okay, so we need to remove it from this top part again. Just gonna brush it out. There we go. Okay, so now if we turn it off and on, you can see it's only being applied to these rocks in here. All right, so let's do one more thing to bring out kind of the glowiness in this water. Let's add a filter. Let's add a glow filter. And one of my favorite filters for bringing in a nice bit of glow to the water is a glow filter. And one of my favorite styles is this Charge More Subtle. So if I turn this off and on, you can see what it does to the water, and it really makes a nice kind of look on your water. But if it's applied to the entire image, it looks kind of fakey. So let's go over here, and let's go down, and in our mode here, we're gonna choose screen. And the reason I'm choosing screen, and I know it's crazy right now, but if you go into that glow filter, we're gonna go into our masking options, we're gonna paste that mask that we used for the water earlier. And now if I pull back on my opacity, I basically just have a control now for how bright I want my water. So I could just pull up on this opacity, I could bring in more glow, less glow, and I can just sit there and control the look and the glow or the brightness of strictly my water tones in this photo. So let's leave it about that. Maybe a little bit more. Perfect. So now let's go in and let's add one of these filters that is rarely used, I feel like, in Photo RAW. So let's add a filter and let's add a lens flare. So with a lens flare, what I typically like to do when I'm using the lens flare filter is I'll go to my type and I'll change it to sunspot. And then I click on this little sun icon here, and this allows me to drag my sunspot around on my photo. So I'm just gonna drag it and I'm gonna drop it on the middle of that sun area. And what I typically like to do with these lens flares is I'll go over and I'll just remove the fade instantly. So now I don't have the fade on there. And what I do is I'll pull down the amount until it's just kind of faint on there, right about like there. And then I go up and I pull up on the raise to about right there. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so we obviously don't want this applied to anywhere else but that sun area on our shot. So let's go over to our lens flare filter here. I'm gonna go into the masking options and I'm gonna invert this mask. So now I'll go up and I have my masking brush selected. I'll set that to paint in. I'll make my brush size pretty big and then I'll just brush this in real quick. So now I have that lens flare at the top of my photo right there. Well, for this lens flare, I'm actually gonna go into my masking options. I'm gonna go to my mode and I'm gonna click overlay. Or not overlay, whoops, sorry. The screen? Nope, it is overlay. Sorry guys, so it is overlay, okay. And then I'm gonna go over to my opacity and I just typically lower it down a little bit. So now if I turn this off and on here, brings in a nice sun ray up there and adds a little bit more style to this photo. So I think one thing we could do to just finish this photo off is we'll add a filter. I'll just add a nice vignette and we'll just use Big Softy. And I'll use my little vignette positioner and I'll position it right on Thor's well. And then we can move the opacity for that filter to about 50. Come on. Okay. All right. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, strictly by using filters instead of effects and a camera profile, really brought out the life in this photo and modified different colors and tones.